A medieval soldier did not imagine capture as chains and a cell. He imagined noise, darkness, hands grabbing him from behind, his weapon gone, his name suddenly meaningless, because the moment you were taken alive, you entered a world where pain was ordinary, mercy was unstable, and survival depended on how long your captors believed you were worth keeping. And this is why men fought until exhaustion, fled in terror, or chose death on the field, because capture did not pause the violence. It transformed it into something quieter, slower, and far more terrifying. In medieval warfare, capture was feared not because of what it promised, but because of what it removed: control, predictability, and dignity. Because once taken alive, a soldier became subject to a chain of decisions that rarely favored him, beginning with immediate rough handling as captors searched for weapons, valuables, or signs of status. And many accounts describe prisoners being struck, kicked, bound, and dragged not as punishment, but as routine processing, because intimidation established dominance early and discouraged resistance. And this initial brutality often continued into confinement, where captives were held in spaces never designed for human care. Castle towers, gatehouses, cellars, caves, abandoned buildings, wooden stockades, places that still exist today in structures like the Tower of London, Château de Loches, and countless medieval keeps across Europe, remind us that imprisonment was not an institution, but an improvisation. Inside these spaces, fear replaced order, because hygiene was non-existent, waste accumulated, water was shared, air stagnated, and disease spread rapidly, turning small wounds into infections and coughs into fatal fevers, while guards rarely intervened unless a captive's death threatened profit, creating an environment where sickness and decay were accepted as normal rather than urgent. Beatings were frequent and unpredictable, not always part of interrogation, but often casual, delivered to enforce silence, extract compliance, or simply demonstrate authority. And because medieval law offered no consistent protections for captives, pain became a language understood by everyone involved. Uncertainty intensified suffering, because prisoners were often moved without warning, marched in chains between camps, castles, and towns, sometimes sold or transferred overnight. So captivity became a disorienting journey where days blurred, identities eroded, and men ceased to know whether they were prisoners, property, or temporary burdens. And it is here, after the shock of capture faded, that fear deepened rather than eased, because survival required adaptation, and adaptation meant submission, as captives learned to read moods, obey without delay, and suppress instinct, knowing that defiance, even accidental, could result in punishment or disappearance. Some were forced into coerced loyalty, compelled to swear oaths, serve enemy forces, or publicly renounce former allegiances, not to change belief, but to break social ties, while others were subjected to ritual humiliation, shaving, branding, forced dress, isolation, mock trials, or religious pressure, designed to erase the soldier's former identity and replace it with dependence, because medieval warfare understood that a broken man was safer than a defiant one. Prisoners were also made to witness consequences, as executions, beatings, and removals occurred within sight of others, creating a controlled atmosphere of dread where fear spread without words. And this psychological pressure often proved more effective than chains, because men learned that survival required silence, obedience, and invisibility. Meanwhile, physical conditions continued to erode bodies, as captives slept on stone or earth, received irregular food, drank contaminated water, and lacked any form of medical care, allowing lice, dysentery, skin infections, and untreated injuries to weaken them slowly, turning captivity into a war of attrition fought against the body itself. Ransom, when possible, did not guarantee relief, because negotiations could stretch for months or years, during which captives lived in limbo, deliberately kept alive but uncomfortable, as time increased leverage, and every delay amplified fear, not just of death, but of being forgotten, because families might fail to raise funds, intermediaries might vanish, or political circumstances might shift, collapsing value overnight. Even release carried risk, because returning captives often came back altered, physically weakened, socially displaced, sometimes suspected of betrayal, proving that survival did not restore what captivity took. All of this explains why medieval soldiers understood surrender as a gamble with no safe outcomes, because capture did not end danger. It transformed it into a prolonged test of endurance, obedience, and luck, while death, brutal as it was, offered certainty and finality. And this is why medieval battles so often ended in desperate resistance or flight rather than orderly surrender, not because soldiers were ignorant of danger, but because they knew that being taken alive meant entering a system designed to extract value, impose fear, and discard men the moment they stopped being useful, making capture not an escape from war, but its most enduring punishment. And even this does not capture the final terror of medieval captivity, because for many prisoners there was no clear endpoint at all, only gradual disappearance, as men died quietly from illness, exhaustion, or neglect without records, graves, or witnesses. Their absence explained away as the cost of war rather than its consequence, while others were released years later into worlds that no longer recognized them, returning to homes altered by time, poverty, or suspicion, carrying physical weakness and psychological scars that medieval society had no language to name and no patience to treat, making survival itself another form of punishment. Because a man who endured capture did not simply leave the war behind, he carried it forward into every remaining year of his life, knowing that what spared him once could never be trusted again.